Once, in a small and quiet village, there lived a boy who never cared much for hard work. Each day he was sent to the rice fields with his father. But while others his age might sweat under the sun and chase away birds with sticks in hand, this boy found clever ways to do less. He drove tall wooden poles into the earth and tied ropes between them, so that when he tugged on a single line, the movement would scare the birds from several corners of the field at once. He could lie in the grass, half asleep, pulling lazily on a rope now and then, and still keep the sparrows away. To the villagers it looked like idleness. To him, it was simply using his mind instead of his body. His father, an aging man with calloused hands, and a back bent by seasons of planting and harvesting, would sometimes pause his work to watch the boy. In those quiet glances lay both affection and unease. He worried that his son's habit of avoiding effort might one day bring ruin. The old man's greatest fear was not death, but the thought of becoming a burden if illness struck, and the boy proved too unprepared to shoulder the weight of survival. That summer, misfortune came. His father fell ill, unable to rise from his straw mat. Without his guidance, the crops withered quickly under the merciless heat, and the boy's small tricks proved useless against the demands of real labor. He tried to water the fields, but his strength faltered. He tried to harvest what remained, but the grain crumbled in his hands. One evening, he sat in the courtyard, the night sky wide and heavy with stars. A deep ache pressed into his chest, the ache of regret. He inhaled, exhaled, slowly, as though the breath itself carried a lesson. Right effort, he thought, was not panic or shortcuts, but the courage to take the next honest step. He remembered the rough texture of his father's hands, cracked and scarred by decades of toil, and in that memory formed a quiet vow to work, not for pride, but out of care. At dawn, the village square erupted with noise. A royal messenger announced a challenge at the king's palace, promising gold to the victor. The crowd laughed when the boy stepped forward to join, yet he did not lower his gaze in shame. Instead, he bowed his head only to steady his breath once more, and walked toward his destiny. Ryan set out the very next morning. The journey to the king's palace would take 3 days, and the road stretched long beneath the burning summer sun. With each step, dust clung to his legs, and the weight of doubt pressed heavier on his shoulders. Yet, somewhere beneath his weariness, a quiet flame flickered. He was no longer running from work. He was walking toward something larger than himself. By the time he reached the grand gates of the palace, Ryan was overwhelmed. Before him gathered hundreds of men, broad-shouldered farmers, soldiers with gleaming armor, merchants hardened by travel. Their muscles shone with oil, and their laughter rang out like thunder. Ryan, thin and sunburned, felt his heart tremble. How could someone like him compete against giants? He nearly turned back, but then he closed his eyes, recalling the stars that had once calmed him and the steady breath of his father. Slowly, the tremor inside him settled. The trumpet sounded. A soldier's voice thundered. The first trial would be across the great palace lake. The surface shimmered under the sun like glass. At the count of 3, the men dove in powerful arms, slapping the water, waves crashing as they pushed forward with sheer force. Ryan, however, did not move. He stood at the shore, calm amid the chaos, and whispered to himself, "This is not a race of strength. It is a race of passage." Quickly, he ran into the nearby forest, gathered fallen branches, and tied them together with rope torn from his own satchel. With patience, he shaped a small raft and pushed it into the lake. Sitting on the rough wood, he took up a broken branch as a paddle. His strokes were awkward and clumsy, but his mind was sharp and steady. While the strong men tired themselves thrashing against the waves, Ryan drifted, his little raft sliding slowly yet surely across the water. When his raft scraped against the far shore, Ryan used the last of his strength to stumble forward. He had not won, but he had done enough third place, just enough to qualify for the next round. The crowd gasped. Whispers filled the air. Could this really be the lazy boy they had mocked? Ryan closed his eyes, let his breath slow, and whispered to the memory of his father, "I am learning." The second dawn at the palace came cloaked in mist. Dew clung to every blade of grass in the king's garden, and the air carried both silence and tension. The finalists were summoned to the courtyard, where colossal wooden blocks had been placed in a row. Each block was taller than a man and wide as a door, the grain of the timber rough and unyielding. Around the blocks lay scattered tools, ropes, heavy iron hooks, sturdy levers, even wooden poles. The task was simple in words but brutal in reality. Push the block for 1 kilometer until it crossed the finish line. As the horn sounded, the stronger men rushed forward. One quickly looped a rope around his block, pulling with all his might, veins bulging on his neck. Another wedged a long piece of wood beneath his block, straining to use it as a lever. Their muscles rippled, their teeth clenched, and sweat darkened their tunics almost immediately. The crowd roared with excitement, cheering for the raw display of strength. Ryan, however, stood still. He placed his hand against the surface of his block, feeling the coarse ridges and the cold weight. A thought whispered within him, "If I fight this block with force, I will fail." He let his palm linger, breathing slowly, and allowed the idea to take root. Then, to the astonishment of the spectators, Ryan picked up not a rope, nor a lever, but a small knife. Murmurs spread. Laughter rippled through the crowd. How could a boy hope to move a giant block with nothing but a blade? Ignoring their jeers, Ryan knelt beside the timber and began to carve. Shavings of wood fell like rain around him. Stroke after stroke, the corners of the block softened. Minutes stretched into an hour, and while the others grunted and strained, Ryan's focus did not waver. Slowly, the shape changed from a heavy square to a rounded form, until the block resembled a great wooden wheel. With one final deep breath, Ryan braced his hands against the smooth surface and pushed. The block rolled forward with surprising ease, gathering speed with each turn. Gasps rose from the crowd as the boy overtook the exhausted competitors, his creation gliding while theirs dragged stubbornly along the earth. As Ryan crossed the finish line first, the king himself stood and smiled. "Wisdom moves mountains where strength cannot," he declared. And in that moment, Ryan understood his true enemy had never been laziness. It had been forgetting his purpose. When the cheers of the crowd finally softened, a hush fell across the courtyard. Ryan stood before the king, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, yet his eyes carried an unusual calm. At his feet lay the treasure he had earned, a chest of gold, gleaming faintly under the morning sun. But even as the weight of victory settled upon him, something deeper stirred within. He did not think first of riches. Instead, his mind wandered back to the withered fields of home, the dry earth splitting under the sun, the nights when he had chosen comfort over effort. He saw his father's face in memory, lined with both tenderness and fatigue, whispering unspoken lessons through each scar on his hands. Ryan realized then that the gold could feed his family for years, but wealth alone was not the true prize he had gained. What mattered more was the discovery that strength is born when love guides every step. That evening, as stars began to dot the vast sky above the palace, Ryan sat quietly beside the unopened chest. He did not rush to count the coins, nor did he boast of his triumph. Instead, he closed his eyes and let his breath flow gently in and out, as though releasing the remnants of regret still lodged in his heart. Gratitude settled where sorrow once lived, and the silence around him felt like a blessing. When he returned to his village, the change was visible. Those who had once laughed now looked at him differently. They no longer saw only the boy who had been lazy. They saw someone who had endured, learned, and chosen a better path. Children gathered around him, eyes wide with admiration, and the elders nodded with respect. His father, though weak, smiled faintly, pride shining in his tired gaze. From then on, Ryan worked not to escape labor, but to honor the life his father had given him and the path he had found for himself. And so the tale closes not as an ending, but as an opening. For in every heart lies the same reminder: when our purpose is clear and rooted in love, even the heaviest burdens can roll forward with ease.